All right, folks, part 2 with chapter 5. Still looking at all these different ways to commit fraud with cash disbursements. All right, so how do we prevent and detect them? So again, this all has to do with purchasing control functions. It's always internal controls. That's really the bottom line to many of this. Again, making sure you have up-to-date approved vendor lists. Make sure there's no duplicate checks going out. And again, separation of duties, purchasing, authorizing, and distributing. Okay, if you separate those functions, it's harder for them to commit fraud. Again, making a copy of each thing. Nowadays, they'd likely be digital, but making sure everything invoice copied with payment. Okay, and make sure that the bank doesn't pay checks to. If you find a fraudulent company, doesn't pay checks to them, right? Okay. Now, another item that folks do is personal purchases with company funds. Okay. By the way, they get really upset if you do that and you get caught. But I can tell you, the state freaks out. Similar to inventory theft, but again, it's not about taking of inventory, but purchasing of inventory. Okay. They use false invoices on credit cards or other company accounts. Now, sometimes they will be buying stuff and selling it back to the company, and other times buying for their own personal use and slipping it through on a company invoice. Okay. So here's a couple of examples that they give. Okay. A couple of examples. Buy an item, have the company pay the invoice. Okay. Kind of common. Okay. And then you don't have to worry about having any invalid invoice. Also, you could be the authorizer. Okay. So you could approve your own purchases. Again, companies, how they prevent this are having different levels. Like, you can only have a certain level of authority. And then falsifying documents. Again, this is always possible these days. We're emailing stuff all around. It doesn't seem that hard to, and again, with poor internal controls, you could see how this could easily happen. Okay. Some other items you could do. You could alter the purchase orders, right? You could alter purchase orders, inflate the order, the amount of materials. Why is it needed? Misrepresent the nature of the purchase. Where is it being shipped to? By the way, to let you know, I'll give you an example here at UNCP. I think it was a couple years ago. I got a call from, I think it was Do It or somebody in that department. And they asked me if I had a UNCP laptop. Now, shouldn't they know I had a UNCP laptop and which laptop it was? Again, now I don't know enough about their internal controls, but when somebody's calling you up and saying, do you have a laptop? And if you answer yes, and could you give us the serial number? Doesn't sound too good. Anyway, just to let you know, it happens, right? By the way, here's a purchasing scheme. You know what? I'm going to let you guys take a look at that. You can make it bigger yourself. But again, there's no way I could expect you to memorize this. Just understand that, honestly, if you were intent upon committing fraud, here's a little roadmap for you. And by the way, don't think that folks out there, by the way, the more people tend to know about this type of stuff, those are the people that can perpetrate it. Okay? Now, what about additional information on personal purchases on credit cards? So if prior approval is not required, that obviously, now traveling like with UNCP, it does. So again, vendors with whom you do regular business, you have to have authorization to have it done. Okay. Returning merchandise for cash. Again, this is trying to take, obviously this is part of the converting it. Okay. And then reviews of credit cards. I'll give you another recent example. Not too long ago, I got a notice from UNCP. I have one of their credit cards. It wanted to know why I had lunch at these two restaurants. I didn't have lunch at those two restaurants. Ever. So now they got to figure out, so I don't know how those wound up on, that they put them towards my card, but I had nothing to do with it. So you could see somewhere in there something's off. I'm not saying that they were not legitimate purchases, but I did not do it. Okay? Now they're talking about some big data ways to check things out. So here kind of using like idea or software like that, you could do a trend analysis, right? Seeing if there's any unusual trends, duplicate payments, debit memos, things like this. High to low, review for reasonableness. That, like, does this seem reasonable, this amount? Okay. Any type of manual checks, you want to look at those. Extract all purchases with no purchase order. All round dollar payments. Again, that's an unusual thing, right? It's not that often a bill is just simply round. Okay. Calculate some ratios. Again, this is our type of ratio analysis. Match vendor file. No telephone or tax ID number. That's a big giveaway right there. Okay. Identify vendors that are added. So in other words, so if a new vendor is added, you want to make sure that they're thoroughly vetted. Okay. Look for ones that don't have a designated business address, and then who had multiple invoices immediately below an approved limit. Like I mentioned before, the approved limit's $1,000, and all the time the invoices are coming in at $950, $975, or something pretty close. Again, another reason to take a look. Okay. By the way, there's a host of these. Again, you don't have to memorize them, but you should know them. Matching vendor file to employee. So you want to make sure your employee is not your vendor. Let's see. List payments to any vendor that exceed the 12-month average. Greater than a percentage, the next largest payment to that vendor. Anyway, some additional ones here. Let's see what else. Multiple charges for the same type of product below a defined credit card list. Summarize the credit card used by employee. That's also something good to do. Different billing address from the delivery address. Again, delivery addresses that do not correspond to company locations. So you can see a lot of this is just the internal controls, making sure. Hopefully somebody has set it up to alert these things. By the way, here's some check tampering schemes. Now we're going to take a look. We're switching over to tampering checks. Okay. 78% of companies were targets of payment fraud in 2017. Whoa, 78%, that's crazy. 77 experienced business email compromise. That happens a lot. Some of them did wires followed by checks. 77% companies implemented internal controls. ACH debit fraud, ACH credit fraud. 67% of the frauds was discovered by the organization's treasury staff. Oof. So you can see there's a lot of fraudulent activity going on. So how do you tamper checks? Now there's a bunch of different ways here, okay? But the perpetrator, they make the check, right? So whoever that person is that's doing it, again, they want to get the company a handle over money. How do they do it? Forged maker, that means you're forging a signature. That could be a company. Forged endorsement is who signed it. Altered payee, who was it paid to. Concealed check, meaning that you don't want them to know that the check is there. And authorized maker. So we'll take a look at each of those. Okay. So the forged maker, okay, this particular scheme, how this works. The legal definition of forgery includes not only signing another person's name with fraudulent intent, but also the fraudulent alteration of a genuine instrument. So a genuine instrument being altered or the signature. Okay, person who signs a check, they're known as the maker of the check. Let's see. Forged check schemes are usually committed by employees who lack signature authority. Okay, so they're not allowed to sign the checks. So what they do is they get access to blank checks, and in this case, they're physical checks, not ACH. Forge an authorized signature, and to conceal the crime. And again, this could happen, and even the likelihood of getting caught in the short term is not all that good. Okay, again, I'm going to let you. I was blowing these up to take a look at them with you, but you can. There's no way you can memorize all this. It's kind of like a flow chart, right? So first thing you got to do here, like they mentioned, obtain the check. Okay. Let's see. You could produce counterfeit checks. That's been done before. And again, safeguarding the checks, the organization's check stock. By the way, this used to be a big thing. Now more and more companies are using ACH, but back in the day, I can tell you when I was in business, company checks, I mean, there's 3 checks. I don't know if you've you've probably seen them, but 3 checks up on a sheet. People used to have thousands of these at the business location. Okay? All right, folks, part 2. Come back with part 3 in just a minute.